When Emma moved in, she didn't expect to be harassed by the HOA president, Mr. Wilson, over something as minor as parking slightly off the line. His overbearing attitude and quick move to call the police left her fuming, but little did he know, Emma wasn't just any newcomer. She had the skills and authority to fight back. The moment she revealed her military ID, everything changed, and suddenly, Mr. Wilson's power trip came crashing down. But just wait until you hear how this dramatic showdown unfolded and how justice ultimately prevailed. When Emma and I finally moved into our new home, it felt like the beginning of something wonderful. We had dreams of cozy weekends, quiet evenings, and making this house truly ours. Emma especially was thrilled. She'd been working hard for years, and this was her chance to settle into a peaceful neighborhood. Everything felt like it was falling into place, but our joy didn't last long. The first day we parked the SUV in the driveway, a little off the line. Nothing too outrageous. Mr. Wilson, the HOA president, took it upon himself to become our personal sheriff. From the moment he saw us, I could feel his eyes on us like a hawk, inspecting every move. Emma was just unloading groceries when he walked over with an air of authority, his face tight, like he was about to deliver bad news. "Ma'am," he started, his voice cold, "you're parked too far over. This will need to be fixed right away." Emma paused, surprised. She wasn't used to this kind of unsolicited criticism. She'd lived in a lot of places before, but never in a neighborhood like this one, where every minor detail seemed to matter. But she didn't want to escalate things, so she gave him a polite nod. "Sure, we'll fix it. Thanks for letting us know." And that should have been the end of it. But it wasn't. A few hours later, just as we were starting to relax, a police car pulled up in front of our house. My stomach sank as I saw Mr. Wilson standing by the door, speaking with the officer. I couldn't believe it. We hadn't done anything wrong. Emma hadn't even gotten out of the car at that point. Yet there he was, pressing some complaint against us. It hit me like a punch to the gut. How had things escalated so quickly? Emma was just trying to settle in. The police officer didn't seem thrilled to be there either, but still, he took down our details and left us with a warning. Emma turned to me, shaking her head. "I didn't even park badly. It was just a little off," she said, her voice full of disbelief. It was a shock. In that moment, I realized we weren't just moving into a home. We were stepping into a world where even the smallest mistake was magnified, judged, and apparently reported to the authorities. It wasn't just a minor issue. It felt like a clear message. We weren't welcome here. The next morning, just as we were getting ready for the day, Mr. Wilson showed up at our door. I could see the familiar tightness in his face. His expression twisted into something between a self-righteous scowl and smug superiority. He was holding a clipboard, as if he had just received some sort of mission to enforce rules. Emma stepped outside to greet him, hoping this was just another small misunderstanding. She had hoped maybe this time things would go a little smoother, but there was no easing into the conversation. Mr. Wilson didn't even offer a greeting. He wasted no time launching into a tirade, waving his hands in the air as he spoke about the proper way to park, the fines for every infraction, and the rules that we were apparently supposed to follow without question. "I don't care what your reasons are," he snapped, pointing at her SUV. "This kind of behavior isn't tolerated in this neighborhood. You're new here, and you'll learn quickly that I don't make exceptions." Emma didn't flinch. She stood there, calm and collected, listening to him like he was nothing more than background noise. But underneath, I could see her jaw tightening. She wasn't someone to be pushed around, especially not over something so trivial. She had dealt with far more serious situations before, and Mr. Wilson's petty complaints were a far cry from the challenges she'd faced. She tried to explain herself, but Mr. Wilson wasn't listening. He was too busy brandishing the HOA rules like some sort of weapon, his voice growing louder with each point he made. "Rules are rules," he barked, clearly enjoying the power trip. "I'm not going to stand by while people like you come in here and make this place a mess." That's when Emma stopped him. She didn't raise her voice, but her tone shifted. She looked him straight in the eye and said, "I'm not here to make trouble, but if you think you can intimidate me, you're wrong." Mr. Wilson blinked in confusion. He couldn't seem to process what she was saying. He thought she was just another homeowner, one of those people who would shrink back and apologize. But Emma wasn't that person. What he didn't know was that she was a reserve officer, trained to handle far more than a man like him. With slow, deliberate movements, Emma reached into her bag and pulled out her military ID. She didn't wave it in his face, but held it firmly in front of him, making sure he saw it. Her expression remained calm, but there was a firmness in her stance that made it clear she wasn't afraid. Mr. Wilson's face turned pale. He stared at the ID, then back at Emma, his confident demeanor cracking. This wasn't the kind of person he was used to dealing with. His eyes flickered from the ID to her face, a sudden realization dawning on him that this was a fight he wasn't prepared for. For a brief moment, the silence between them was deafening. Emma didn't have to say anything else. Her presence alone was enough to make him question everything he thought he knew about power. The air between them thickened, almost unbearable. Mr. Wilson stood frozen for a moment, staring at the military ID in Emma's hand. His face drained of color, as though he had just realized he had stepped too far into territory he wasn't equipped to handle. For a brief second, he looked almost human. The self-righteous energy that had been radiating from him evaporated, replaced by an awkward, almost fearful hesitation. Emma's calm eyes never wavered as she held the ID, her grip steady. She wasn't about to back down. She didn't need to yell or threaten. The authority she had in her pocket spoke louder than any words could. This was no HOA president trying to enforce trivial rules. This was someone who had seen real situations, dealt with real consequences, and wasn't afraid to stand her ground. "You may want to reconsider your approach," Emma said, her voice even but firm, "because I don't think this is something you want to escalate." Mr. Wilson opened his mouth, but no words came out. He swallowed hard, his mind racing, trying to recalibrate the situation. This wasn't supposed to be how things went. He wasn't supposed to feel powerless. He was the one who held the power in this neighborhood, the one who could find people, push them around, and ensure everything was properly maintained. Yet in front of him was someone who had seen and handled far more than his little HOA rules could ever prepare him for. Emma didn't flinch. She didn't need to. Mr. Wilson's hands trembled slightly as he shuffled through his papers, trying to find a way to regain control. But it was too late. His moment had passed. She had already drawn the line. The moment he thought he could intimidate her with empty threats and petty rules, he'd underestimated the wrong person. "You're threatening the wrong person," Emma continued, her words cutting through the tension like a knife. "I'm not just some homeowner you can push around with your rules and fines." She wasn't raising her voice, but there was a quiet power in it, something that made Mr. Wilson's posture falter just slightly. He looked away, his eyes darting back to the ID, then quickly back to Emma, avoiding the strength in her gaze. For the first time, he felt like he was losing control, not just of the situation, but of his image as the enforcer of the neighborhood. His anger started to bubble beneath the surface, but it was no longer the kind of anger that came from a place of power. This was the frustrated, impotent kind, where you realize you've crossed a line and now you're trapped in your own mistake. He could feel his face getting warmer, the tightness in his throat building with every second, but he didn't know how to respond. There was nothing left to say that wouldn't make him look weaker. He could feel the sting of humiliation creeping up, but it was too late. For a moment, it seemed like he was going to just turn and leave, but then his eyes flicked to the ground, and when he looked back at Emma, there was something new in his gaze. Anger, raw and real, but it was no longer directed at her. He was angry at himself for underestimating her, for thinking he could simply dismiss her the way he had with others. But Emma wasn't done. She stepped forward slightly, her presence making him take an involuntary step back. Her eyes were locked on his, unwavering, until he finally broke the silence. I'll have to report this," he muttered, trying to salvage what little dignity he had left. Emma didn't respond immediately, but when she did, her voice was soft, almost pitying. "Go ahead, I've got nothing to hide." The words hung in the air. Mr. Wilson's chest tightened as he realized the power balance had shifted in a way he couldn't reverse. The feeling of control which had fueled him since this whole ordeal began was slipping through his fingers. As the police officer stepped onto our driveway, the tension in the air seemed to dissipate, at least for me. I could tell Emma wasn't nervous. Her posture was relaxed, but there was a steely determination behind her calm exterior. The officer listened carefully to both sides, his brow furrowed as Mr. Wilson launched into his complaint. The more Mr. Wilson spoke, the more his argument seemed to unravel. Emma stood quietly, simply waiting for the moment to speak, but the officer wasn't fooled. He had heard it all before. The petty neighborhood disputes, the false accusations, the feigned authority. When it was Emma's turn, she explained everything clearly, without a trace of emotion in her voice. She didn't raise her voice, didn't try to yell over him. She didn't need to. Her words were measured, her tone controlled. She told the officer exactly what had happened, and then she handed him the military ID once more. She didn't say a word, but the effect was immediate. The officer nodded, his eyes shifting to Mr. Wilson, who was growing visibly more uncomfortable by the second. It was clear that Mr. Wilson had overplayed his hand. His accusations didn't hold up, and with every word Emma spoke, it became even more apparent that he was the one at fault here. The officer turned to him, the air between them suddenly colder. "I'm going to have to dismiss your complaint, sir," the officer said, his voice firm. "There's no cause for action here. You're free to go." Mr. Wilson's face was a mix of shock and frustration. He opened his mouth, perhaps to argue, but he stopped himself. The reality of the situation was sinking in. There was nothing left for him to do but admit his defeat. The officer gave Emma a brief, approving nod, then turned to Mr. Wilson. "I suggest you make sure any future concerns are handled according to the law and not by intimidation." With that, he walked away, leaving Mr. Wilson to stew in the frustration of his failed attempt to control the situation. And then the silence hung in the air for just a moment. Before it was broken by Emma's quiet exhale, she turned to me, a slight smile tugging at the corners of her lips. There was no need for a big celebration, no grand gesture. The satisfaction was in the quiet victory, the knowledge that Emma had not only stood her ground, but had done so with grace. As Mr. Wilson gathered his things and began to walk back to his car, head hung low, we exchanged a look of silent understanding. There was no need for words. Justice had been served. He hadn't won. He had tried to make us feel small, to make us bend to his will. But in the end, it was Emma who had stood tall, unshaken by his petty intimidation. And as he drove away, the weight that had hung over us for the past day seemed to lift, replaced by a feeling of empowerment. We hadn't just defended our rights. We had reminded ourselves that true strength isn't about force or power. It's about knowing when to stand firm and when to stay calm. We watched as Mr. Wilson's car disappeared around the corner, the image of him shrinking away from the fight, a satisfying one. Emma's quiet strength had proven to be more than enough, and in the end, we had won. Not just the battle, but the peace that came with knowing we'd done the right thing.